The Hamster's Great Escape, a funny and epic holiday sleep story in a cozy home on a quiet street, where the December snow drifted softly past frosted windows and the scent of pine and cinnamon filled the air. There lived a small but exceedingly brave hamster named Captain Ferdinand. To the family who cared for him, he was simply Verdi, a golden-furred ball of energy who ran on his wheel at night and stuffed his cheeks with sunflower seeds during the day. But Captain Ferdinand knew better. He knew that he was, in fact, the commander of a magnificent fortress, a multi-level territory of platforms and tunnels that he defended with unwavering vigilance. His cage sat upon a sturdy table in the corner of the living room, positioned with a strategic view of the entire domain. From his highest platform, Captain Ferdinand could survey the vast landscape of carpet and furniture, the towering mountains of sofas and chairs, the mysterious shadows beneath tables. He had mapped every inch of his fortress over countless nights, knew every tunnel by heart, every level by touch. His whiskers, those sensitive instruments of navigation, could detect the slightest vibration in the air. Ted, remarkably acute even by hamster standards, could distinguish between the scent of his water bottle and the subtle aroma of his food dish with extraordinary precision. On this particular evening, as the winter sun set early and painted the living room in shades of amber and gold, something different filled the air. Captain Ferdinand sat up on his hind legs atop his favorite platform, his small pink nose twitching with increased intensity. The sounds beyond his fortress had changed. Where there was usually the quiet hum of the television or the soft conversation of his family, now there erupted a symphony of new noises. Voices, many voices, some familiar and some foreign to his ears. The chiming of the doorbell repeated again and again, laughter, bright and musical, the shuffle of many feet across the floor. The holiday party had begun. Captain Ferdinand watched with keen interest as family and friends streamed into the living room, bringing with them a wealth of new scents. Perfume and cologne mingled with the crisp, cold air that entered each time the door opened. The rich, savory aroma of appetizers being carried from the kitchen. And then something else, something that made his entire small body freeze with attention. His whiskers quivering, his dark eyes widening with wonder. It was a scent unlike anything he had encountered in his entire existence. Sweet, yes, but not the simple sweetness of his treats or the fruit he was sometimes given. This was complex, layered, magnificent, carried notes of spice that tickled his sensitive nose, warm and inviting like the cinnamon sticks his humans sometimes placed near his cage during this time of year. There was ginger, sharp and alive, molasses, deep and rich, nutmeg and clove dancing together in perfect harmony. And underneath it all, the warm, comforting aroma of something baked, something golden and wonderful. Captain Ferdinand had no name for what he was smelling. He knew only that it called to him with an irresistible pull, a magnetic force that seemed to reach right into his small hamster soul and whisper of adventure, of discovery, of rewards beyond imagining. And then, in the midst of all this sensory wonder, came the moment that would change everything. A young voice called out, bright with excitement, "Can I see Ferdy, please?" Footsteps approached his fortress, and Captain Ferdinand recognized the child, one of the smallest humans who sometimes visited. Small hands, usually so careful, reached toward the cage door. There was a fumbling sound, a metallic click. The child was called away by a parent before the door even opened, distracted by something else exciting happening across the room. But the door, Captain Ferdinand realized with a sudden thrill that made his tiny heart race. The door had been unlatched. He approached it slowly, cautiously, the way any good commander would approach an unexpected opportunity. His whiskers investigated first, probing the small gap where the door had shifted slightly ajar. Then his nose, breathing in the unobstructed air from beyond his fortress. Finally, with the smallest application of pressure from his pink paw, the door swung open. Before him lay the greatest wilderness he had ever contemplated, the living room floor. Captain Ferdinand stood at the threshold of his fortress, looking out upon a landscape that stretched before him like an endless ocean of beige carpet. From this perspective, at floor level where his eyes naturally saw the world, everything took on proportions both terrifying and magnificent. What he had observed from his elevated cage, the furniture and decorations that seemed merely large, now towered above him like the mountains and forests of some primordial realm. The party continued in full swing around him, but the guests were preoccupied with their conversations and celebrations, standing in clusters near the kitchen or gathered around the dining table. No one noticed the small golden explorer as he took his first tentative step beyond the only world he had truly known. The carpet beneath his paws felt different than the soft bedding of his cage. Each fiber was distinct, creating a textured landscape that his sensitive paws could read like a map. With every step, he gathered information. Here, the carpet was slightly worn from frequent footsteps. There, a few inches away, it was fresher, less traveled. His whiskers, extending from his face like delicate sensors, detected the subtle movements of air, the currents created by people walking past in the distance, the warmth rising from a nearby heating vent. But it was his nose that truly guided him, that remarkable instrument more powerful than any compass. The gingerbread scent was stronger now, unfiltered by the bars of his cage. It seemed to have weight, substance, pulling him forward like a rope made of pure aroma. Captain Ferdinand paused to taste the air more fully, his nose working rapidly, processing the complex bouquet. The spices called to something deep within him, something primal and adventurous. This, he understood with absolute certainty, was a scent worth pursuing. This was a quest worth undertaking. He moved forward with purpose now, his stride small but determined. Each step was a commitment, a small act of bravery. Behind him, his fortress sat open and welcoming, offering the safety and security he had always known. Before him lay uncertainty, danger perhaps, but also the promise of something extraordinary. The carpet stretched on, and Captain Ferdinand began his epic journey toward that magnificent, mysterious scent. As he ventured deeper into the wilderness of the living room, the true scale of his undertaking began to reveal itself. What appeared from his cage to be a simple, open space now manifested as a complex terrain filled with obstacles and wonders. The first challenge appeared before him in the form of a chair leg, one of four supporting a large armchair positioned near the fireplace. To Captain Ferdinand, approaching from ground level, this was no mere leg of furniture. This was a towering pillar, a massive tree trunk of dark wood that rose into the heights far above his head. He had to crane his neck back, tilting his small face upward to see where it disappeared into the shadows of the chair's underside. The wood grain created patterns that seemed to swirl and dance in the soft light of the living room, rivers and valleys carved into the surface. He placed one paw against it, feeling the cool, smooth texture. The solidity of it was reassuring in some way, a landmark he could use to orient himself. But it was also a reminder of how small he was in this vast territory, how enormous everything loomed around him. The sounds of the party reached him here in altered form. Voices and laughter echoed strangely at floor level, bouncing off furniture and walls in ways that created an acoustic landscape entirely different from what he heard in his elevated cage. Every sound seemed both muffled and amplified. A burst of laughter from across the room made him freeze, his heart pattering rapidly in his chest. When no danger materialized, when no giant foot descended toward him, he continued onward. He navigated past the first chair leg, using it as a waypoint in his mental map. His whiskers brushed against the carpet fibers on one side and the smooth wood on the other, feeding him constant information about his position. This was how hamsters moved through the world, he realized with a strange pride. Not with the arrogant confidence of larger creatures who could see far ahead, but with this careful, tactile exploration, building understanding through touch and scent rather than distant sight. More chair legs appeared as he progressed. Each one required navigation, careful consideration of the path around or between them. The space beneath the furniture created tunnels of shadow, and while Captain Ferdinand's eyes were not particularly adept at seeing in bright light, they had adapted beautifully for these dim conditions. The shadows held no terror for him, only more territory to explore. A table leg came next, significantly larger than the chair legs, its base wider and more substantial. This was a support beam of truly epic proportions. And Captain Ferdinand found himself circling it partially, tracing its circumference as he decided on the best route forward. The gingerbread scent guided him, always forward, always toward the far side of the room where, though he could not yet see it, his destination waited. As he emerged from the forest of furniture legs, Captain Ferdinand encountered terrain of an entirely different nature. Scattered across the carpet before him lay what could only be described as mountains, a range of peaks and valleys in brilliant, festive colors. These were the remnants of gift trapping, crumpled balls, and sheets of paper that had been carelessly discarded in the excitement of opening presents. To human eyes, they were merely trash waiting to be collected, paper to be stuffed into garbage bags at evening's end. But to Captain Ferdinand, approaching them at his tiny scale, they were mountains demanding to be conquered. The first hill rose before him in shimmering red foil, surface catching the light from the Christmas tree across the room and throwing it back in 1,000 tiny sparkles. He approached cautiously, placing his front paws on the lower slope. The paper crinkled beneath his weight, creating a sound that seemed enormously loud to his sensitive ears. It crackled and rustled, announcing his presence to the entire world, or so it seemed to his small, brave heart. But Captain Ferdinand was not one to turn back from a challenge. He had come this far, after all, driven by courage and the irresistible call of that wonderful scent. He began to climb. The scent was treacherous in ways he had not anticipated. The paper shifted beneath him with every step, unstable and unreliable. His claws sought purchase, but found the smooth foil surface difficult to grip. He slipped once, twice, scrambling with his back legs to maintain his position. The crinkling sound intensified with his efforts, a percussion symphony played on paper instruments. When he finally reached the summit of the red foil mountain, Captain Ferdinand paused to catch his breath, his small sides heaving with exertion. From this height, perhaps 6 inches above the carpet, he had a new perspective on his journey. He could see farther now, could observe the layout of the furniture forest he had navigated and the path still ahead. And there, in the distance, sitting upon a low table near the far wall, he saw it for the first time, the gingerbread house. Even from this distance, even with his relatively poor, distant vision, he could see that it was magnificent. It caught the light from the room's many candles and lamps, seeming to glow with an inner luminescence. Its walls were brown and golden, clearly made of something edible, something wonderful. He could see the outline of a roof, decorated with what he would later learn were white icing ridges meant to represent snow. And the scent, the scent that emanated from it was stronger now, more complex and inviting than ever before. This was his Mount Everest, This was the summit he must reach. Captain Ferdinand descended the other side of the wrapping paper mountain with significantly more haste than he had climbed it, sliding partially down the slope in a small avalanche of crinkling foil. He landed on the carpet with a soft thump, immediately righting himself and shaking his fur back into place. No time to waste. The goal was in sight. More paper mountains lay ahead, and he tackled each with growing confidence. It's a silver-wrapped sphere that he had to circle around, finding it too steep and smooth to climb directly. A pile of green tissue paper that compressed beneath him like a soft cloud, making his steps uncertain but not impossible. A sheet of newspaper that crackled with every movement. Its black and white patterns creating a strange landscape of text and images that meant nothing to his hamster eyes, but served as a landmark nonetheless. With each mountain conquered, with each valley crossed, Captain Ferdinand felt something growing within him. It was more than just determination to reach the gingerbread house, though that remained his primary objective. It was a sense of himself as an explorer, an adventurer, someone capable of great deeds despite his small size. Every challenge overcome added to this feeling, building within him a confidence he had never known while safe within his fortress. The paper mountains finally gave way to clear carpet once more, and Captain Ferdinand paused to reassess his route. The gingerbread house was closer now, tantalizingly close. He could see more details of its construction, could distinguish individual candies adhered to its surface. The scent was so strong, it made his mouth water, made his whiskers quiver with anticipation. But between him and his goal lay one final obstacle, one ultimate challenge that would require all of his courage to overcome. The dragon was sleeping. Captain Ferdinand froze when he first spotted it, small body going absolutely still in the way that prey animals do when faced with a predator. There, sprawled across a patch of carpet directly in his path, lay the family cat. To say the cat was large would be a catastrophic understatement of proportion. From Captain Ferdinand's ground-level perspective, the creature was absolutely enormous, a mountain of fur that rose and fell with slow, measured breaths. The cat lay on its side, stretched out in the comfortable position of an animal completely at ease, completely secure in its domain. The cat's fur was a soft, tabby pattern, stripes of gray and black creating a landscape of their own across its body. In the warm light of the living room, those stripes seemed to shift and flow with each breath, creating an almost hypnotic pattern. Captain Ferdinand could see individual hairs, could observe how they lay in different directions, creating swirls and whirls across the cat's side and legs. But it was the face that commanded his attention most fully. The cat's head rested on its paws, eyes closed in peaceful slumber. But the features were undeniably those of a predator. The nose, pink and soft, was nonetheless many times larger than Ferdinand's entire head. The mouth, partially open, revealed just a hint of white fangs. The ears, folded back in relaxation, were triangular sentinels that even in sleep might detect the slightest unusual sound. And then there was the purring. Captain Ferdinand had heard the cat purr before, from the safe distance of his elevated cage. It had sounded like a pleasant rumble, a soothing white noise that sometimes accompanied his own afternoon naps. Here, at ground level, only a few feet away from the source, the purr was something entirely different. It was a sound that resonated through the carpet itself, vibrations that Captain Ferdinand could feel through his sensitive paws. It rolled like distant thunder, a deep, rhythmic rumbling that spoke of contentment, but also of barely contained power. The purr rose and fell with the cat's breathing, creating a pattern of sound and vibration that was both terrifying and oddly mesmerizing. Each breath the cat took moved its massive chest, a gentle rise and fall that demonstrated the vast difference in their sizes. The cat probably weighed hundreds of times what Captain Ferdinand weighed. One lazy swipe of those paws, if the cat was so inclined, could end his journey instantly. But the cat was deeply asleep. Ferdinand could see this in the complete relaxation of its body, in the way its paws twitched occasionally with dreams, in the steady, unchanging rhythm of its breathing and purring. Holiday parties were exciting for humans, but they exhausted cats, and this one had apparently found a warm, comfortable spot to wait out the festivities in unconscious peace. Captain Ferdinand faced a choice. He could turn back, abandon his quest, return safely to his fortress with no one the wiser. The cat, this slumbering dragon of fur and claws, represented danger on a scale he had never faced before. All his instincts, all his pre-animal wisdom screamed at him to flee, to hide, to seek safety. But the gingerbread house waited beyond the dragon. That glorious, magnificent scent called to him still, undiminished by fear. He had come so far, conquered so many obstacles. To turn back now would be to deny everything this journey had awakened within him. Captain Ferdinand took a deep breath, gathering his courage. Then, moving with all the stealth and caution his small body could muster, he began to navigate around the sleeping cat. Every movement was calculated with precision. Captain Ferdinand had learned much during his journey across the carpet wilderness, and he applied all of that knowledge now. He tested each placement of his paws before committing his full weight, ensuring the carpet wouldn't rustle or shift beneath him. His whiskers remained perfectly still, not wanting to create even the slightest vibration in the air that might disturb the sleeping dragon. He chose a path that would take him around the cat at the maximum possible distance, while still maintaining his course toward the gingerbread house, passing perhaps 2 feet from the cat's head, close enough that he could smell the feline scent, could observe every detail of his sleeping face with uncomfortable clarity. The cat's whiskers, he noticed, were enormous, thick bristles that extended far from its face, even in sleep. They twitched occasionally, responding to whatever dreams played out behind those closed eyelids. Each twitch sent a spike of fear through Ferdinand's small body, made him freeze and wait, heart hammering, until the movement ceased and he could continue. The purring filled the world now, not just a sound, but a physical presence that surrounded him completely. He could feel it resonating in his tiny bones, rattling through his chest. It was like walking beside a great machine, an engine of contentment that spoke to the cat's secure comfort, but also to its inherent power. Step by tiny step, Captain Ferdinand crept past the dragon. He kept his eyes fixed on the cat's face, watching for any sign of waking, any indication that his presence had been detected. The cat's nose wrinkled once, whiskers twitching more vigorously, and Ferdinand thought his heart might simply stop from fear. But after a moment, the cat settled again, its breathing returning to that slow, steady rhythm. Halfway past now, the critical zone. If the cat woke now, Ferdinand would be directly in its line of sight, with no cover, no escape route that wouldn't require crossing even closer to those potentially deadly paws. A particularly loud burst of laughter erupted from the party guests gathered in the dining room. The sound made Ferdinand flinch, made him crouch low against the carpet, making himself as small as possible. The cat's ear flicked, responding to the noise, but its eyes remained closed. The purring never faltered, that steady rumble of deep sleep. Ferdinand waited, counted 3 heartbeats, then continued his passage. 3/4 passed. He was moving away from the head now, alongside the cat's body, where its legs stretched out in relaxed extension. These limbs, even in repose, spoke of the cat's capabilities. The paws were huge, each pad a dark shadow against the gray fur. The claws were mercifully retracted, but Ferdinand knew they were there, ready to deploy in an instant if needed. Finally, after what felt like a journey lasting hours, but was in reality perhaps 2 minutes, Captain Ferdinand cleared the cat's zone of danger. He put another few feet between himself and the slumbering dragon before allowing himself to pause, to look back at what he had accomplished. The cat slept on, utterly unaware of the brave hamster who had just passed within striking distance. Its purr continued, a rhythmic soundtrack to its dreams, and its breathing remained slow and peaceful. Captain Ferdinand had faced his greatest fear and triumphed. The dragon had been passed. With renewed energy and confidence surging through his small frame, he turned his attention to his ultimate destination. The gingerbread house was close now, so close he could see individual details of its construction. He moved forward with purpose, ready to claim his prize. As Captain Ferdinand approached the low table where the gingerbread house stood, he felt a sense of awe that seemed to expand his small chest to nearly bursting. At last, was the source of that magnificent scent that had called to him across the living room, that had given him courage to leave his fortress and brave the wilderness beyond. The table itself was another mountain to be conquered, though of a different sort than the paper peaks he had crossed earlier. Its surface stood perhaps 18 inches above the carpet. From Ferdinand's perspective, might as well have been 18 miles. But the family had, in their decorating, inadvertently created a path for a determined hamster. A thick holiday tablecloth draped over the table's edge, its fabric hanging down in loose folds that nearly touched the floor. To Ferdinand, these folds became a climbing rope, a route to the summit. He approached the cloth and reached up with his front paws, finding purchase in the woven fabric. His claws gripped the threads, and he began to climb. The ascent was slow but steady. Ferdinand had spent countless hours in his fortress, climbing the various levels and platforms, and those practice sessions served him well now. He pulled himself upward, paw over paw, his back legs scrabbling for footholds in the fabric's texture. The cloth swayed slightly with his movements, creating a gentle, rocking motion that required balance and determination to overcome. Halfway up, he paused to rest, clinging to the tablecloth and looking back the way he had come. From this height, he could see his entire journey laid out below. The carpet stretched away like a vast plain. The mountains of wrapping paper seemed smaller now, less intimidating from this elevated perspective. The cat still slept in the distance, a harmless-looking mound of fur from here, though Ferdinand knew better than to underestimate it even now. And there, so far away it seemed impossible he had crossed such a distance, sat his fortress. The cage door still hung open, waiting for his return. Part of him felt a tug of longing for that safety, that familiar security. But the stronger part, the part that had awakened during this epic quest, urged him onward and upward. He resumed his climb. Paw over paw, steady progress despite the burning in his small muscles, despite the challenge of the swaying fabric. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of effort, he pulled himself over the table's edge and onto its surface. Captain Ferdinand stood on the tabletop, sides heaving with exertion, and beheld his destination in all its glory. The gingerbread house was extraordinary. From his cage across the room, he had only glimpsed its outline, understood it as something special, but lacked the detail to truly appreciate its magnificence. Now, standing before it, he could take in every wonderful aspect of its construction. The house stood perhaps 8 inches tall, a palace from Ferdinand's perspective. Its walls were made of thick gingerbread, their surface a rich, deep brown that spoke of molasses and spices. The texture was not smooth, but rather slightly rough, with tiny air pockets and irregularities that gave it character. White icing had been piped along the edges where walls met, creating architectural details that resembled snow-covered trim. The roof slanted upward in the traditional style, covered in what appeared to be overlapping shingles made of thin gingerbread cookies. More white icing dripped from the roof's edges like icicles, frozen in sweet permanence. Atop the peak sat a small chimney constructed from the same gingerbread as the walls, with a tiny swirl of white icing emerging from its top to simulate smoke. But it was the decorations that truly captured Ferdinand's attention and filled him with wonder. The entire house was adorned with candies of every description, each one carefully placed to create a fairy tale appearance. There were round peppermints that served as stones along a walkway leading to the front door. Gumdrops in rainbow colors dotted the walls like colorful windows. Candy canes had been broken into small segments and arranged to create a fence around the house as perimeter. And along the roofline, within easy reach, if Ferdinand could just climb a bit higher, hung an array of small gumdrops, each one glistening in the soft light, each one radiating the concentrated scent of sugar and fruit flavoring. The scent of the entire creation was overwhelming in the best possible way. The gingerbread itself, with its complex blend of spices, formed the foundation of the aroma. Ginger, of course, sharp and warm. Cinnamon, sweet and comforting. Atemi and cloves, adding their own subtle notes to the symphony. The molasses provided a deep, rich undertone that spoke of something ancient and wonderful. Layered atop the gingerbread scent came the sugar, pure and sweet from the icing and candies. It was the kind of sweetness that made Ferdinand's nose twitch with anticipation, that caused his small mouth to water involuntarily. This was not the simple sweetness of the pellets in his food bowl, or even the fruit treats he was occasionally given. This was concentrated joy in olfactory form, a scent so pure and desirable that it seemed impossible anything could taste as good as this smelled. Captain Ferdinand circled the house slowly, taking in every angle, every detail. He observed how the late afternoon light streaming through the windows caught the icing and made it sparkle, how the candies cast tiny colored shadows on the white tablecloth beneath them. He noted the care that had gone into the construction, the obvious love and attention to detail. This was no mere food item. This was art. This was architecture on a scale he could appreciate and understand. This was a monument to creativity and sweetness, to tradition and celebration. And Captain Ferdinand, brave explorer, intrepid adventurer, humble hamster who had journeyed across a living room floor as if it were a continent, was going to taste it. The approach to the gingerbread house required careful planning. While Ferdinand had successfully climbed to the table surface, the house itself still towered above him. He needed to reach the lower decorations, the accessible candies that he could claim as his prize for this epic quest. He identified his target, a particularly plump gumdrop attached to the gingerbread wall about 3 inches above the tablecloth. It was red, the color of summer strawberries or winter holly, and it seemed to glow with an inner light that called to him. This, he decided, would be his trophy. The path upward presented itself in the form of the candy cane fence. These segments, pressed into soft icing at the house's base, created a series of small handholds. Ferdinand approached the fence and tested one of the candy canes with his paw, ensuring it was stable enough to support his weight. The icing held firm, and the candy cane didn't budge. He began his final ascent. Using the candy canes as steps, he climbed toward his target gumdrop. Each placement of his paws was deliberate, tested before he committed. The tease was slightly sticky, which actually helped, providing additional traction. The candy canes were smooth but grippable, their peppermint scent adding yet another layer to the complex aromatic environment. Up he went, inch by tiny inch. The gumdrop grew closer. He could see its surface now, slightly crystallized with sugar, glistening like a jewel. The scent of strawberry flavoring reached him, sweet and artificial, and utterly irresistible. One final stretch, reaching up with his front paws while balancing on a candy cane with his back legs. His small body extended to its fullest reach. His paws touched the gumdrop, felt its soft, firm texture, the sugar crystals rough against his sensitive toe pads. And then, with a little wiggling and pulling, the gumdrop came free from its icing adhesive. Captain Ferdinand nearly lost his balance with the sudden release, scrambling for a moment before stabilizing himself on the candy cane perch. The gumdrop was in his paws now, its weight substantial but manageable. He brought it close to his face, his nose working overtime to process its scent, and then, finally, took his first bite. The taste exploded across his tongue with such intensity that Ferdinand felt his eyes widen in surprise and delight. The outer layer crunched slightly, the crystallized sugar providing texture and an immediate burst of sweetness. Beneath that came the softer interior of the gumdrop itself, chewy and rich with artificial strawberry flavor. It was, without question, the most delicious thing Captain Ferdinand had ever tasted. The pellets in his food bowl were nutritious and satisfying. The sunflower seeds he hoarded were treats he genuinely enjoyed. The pieces of apple or carrot he received were refreshing and pleasant. But this candy, this small piece of holiday decoration, was transcendent. He sat there on the candy cane fence, clinging to his perch with his back legs, holding his prized gumdrop with his front paws, and nibbled at it with the concentration of a gourmet savoring a rare delicacy. Each bite brought new sensations, new confirmations that his journey had been worth every moment of fear, every challenge overcome. The gingerbread house rose behind him like a cathedral dedicated to sweetness. The party continued in the other room, the sounds of celebration creating a distant soundtrack to his private triumph. The cat still slept, the carpet wilderness still stretched below, and his fortress still waited with its open door. But here, now, in this moment, Captain Ferdinand was exactly where he needed to be. He was the conqueror of mountains, the navigator of furniture forests, the brave soul who had passed the dragon and reached the summit of his desires. He was, for this perfect moment, completely and utterly content. Captain Ferdinand had no way of knowing how long he sat there, perched on the candy cane fence of the gingerbread house, working his way through his hard-won gumdrop prize. Time seemed to stretch and contract, becoming meaningless in the face of his achievement and satisfaction. He was aware only of the taste of strawberry sweetness, the comfortable exhaustion in his small muscles, and a profound sense of accomplishment that warmed him from whiskers to tail. He had taken perhaps 3 small bites from the gumdrop, barely making a dent in its substantial mass, when a new sound reached his sensitive ears. This was different from the party noises he had grown accustomed to during his journey. This was closer, more immediate. Footsteps approaching the table. Ferdinand looked up from his treat, his small dark eyes meeting those of a much larger creature. A young girl, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, stood before the table. Her face was level with Ferdinand's current position, putting them at eye level with each other. She wore a red holiday dress, and her hair was pulled back with a ribbon that matched. But it was her expression that Ferdinand noticed most clearly, even with his relatively limited ability to read human faces. Her eyes were wide with surprise, but not with the fear or aggression that might have accompanied such a discovery. Her mouth formed a small circle of astonishment. And then, after a moment of perfect stillness, her face broke into a smile of pure delight. "Oh," she whispered, her voice soft and high, careful not to startle the small explorer. "Oh my goodness, you're so far from your cage." She turned her head slightly, calling over her shoulder, but maintaining her gentle tone. "Mom, Dad, come here. You have to see this." More footsteps approached, slower and heavier than the child's. An adult's face appeared next to the girl's, and then another. Ferdinand recognized his primary caretaker, the human who filled his food bowl and cleaned his fortress and sometimes held him gently while watching television in the evening. "Well, look at that," the adult said, and there was something in the voice that Ferdinand had heard before, something warm and affectionate. "Ferdy's had quite an adventure, hasn't he?" "He climbed all the way up here," the girl said, her voice filled with admiration. "And he found the gingerbread house. Blah. He's eating one of the gumdrops." More family members gathered around the table now, drawn by the commotion. The party guests, too, began to notice, and a small crowd formed around the table where Captain Ferdinand sat, still clutching his partially eaten gumdrop, his whiskers dusted with sugar crystals. "How did he even get out?" someone asked. Came a small voice, and Ferdinand recognized it as belonging to the child who had approached his cage earlier. "I think I forgot to close his door all the way. I'm sorry. I just wanted to see him, and then Jake called me to come see the snow globe, and I forgot." "It's all right, sweetie," Ferdinand's caretaker said gently. "No harm done. Look at him. He's having the time of his life." And it was true. Ferdinand sat there on his candy cane perch, surrounded by giant faces, and felt no fear. Perhaps it was the exhaustion from his journey, or perhaps it was the satisfaction of having reached his goal. But in this moment, discovery felt right, natural, the culmination of his quest rather than its ruin. "We should get him back to his cage," someone suggested, "before he eats too much candy. That much sugar can't be good for a hamster." Ferdinand's caretaker reached out with both hands, cupping them beneath Ferdinand's perch. The approach was slow, telegraphed, giving him every opportunity to understand what was happening. When the hands came close enough, Ferdinand made no effort to flee. Instead, he simply stepped onto the warm palms, still holding his gumdrop treasure. "There we go, little adventurer," the caretaker said softly, lifting Ferdinand away from the gingerbread house. "Let's get you home safely." As he was carried across the living room, Ferdinand had a new perspective on his journey. From this height, cradled in human hands, he could see the entire route he had traversed. The path seemed shorter from this vantage point, less imposing. But he knew the truth of what he had accomplished. K's distance was relative. Challenge was personal. To his human family, it had been merely a living room. To Captain Ferdinand, it had been an expedition worthy of legend. They passed the sleeping cat, which had finally begun to stir, awakened by the increased commotion. Its yellow eyes opened slowly, fixing on Ferdinand for just a moment. If the dragon felt any regret at having slept through the passage of such worthy prey, it showed no sign. It merely yawned, displaying those impressive fangs, then stretched and padded away toward a quieter corner. The wrapping paper mountains had been disturbed by passing feet, their peaks flattened, their slopes altered. But Ferdinand remembered them as they had been, remembered the challenge of their ascent and the triumph of their conquest. The furniture forest stood unchanged, those great pillars of wood still towering toward the ceiling. But Ferdinand had navigated them, had mapped their positions, had made the unknown known, and then they arrived at his fortress. The cage door still hung open, waiting. His caretaker lowered Ferdinand gently toward the entrance, and he stepped from the warm hands onto the familiar platform of his home. "You can keep that," the caretaker said, watching as Ferdinand carefully carried his gumdrop piece to his favorite corner. "You earned it, little guy." The door was checked, then properly latched, this time securing Ferdinand safely inside his domain. But even as the latch clicked into place, Ferdinand felt no sense of imprisonment. The bars of his cage were not a prison. They were the walls of his fortress, his chosen territory, his home. The humans gradually dispersed, returning to their party, though many cast fond glances toward the cage as they passed. The little girl in the red dress stayed the longest, her face pressed close to the bars, watching Ferdinand with obvious affection. "You're very brave," she whispered to him. That was the best adventure ever. Then she too left, drawn back to the festivities by the promise of hot chocolate and cookies. Captain Ferdinand settled into his favorite sleeping spot, a small hidey house filled with soft bedding that he had arranged just so. He had moved his gumdrop piece here, positioning it carefully where he could see it, where he could reach it when he wanted another small taste of his victory. His muscles ached pleasantly, the kind of tiredness that came from genuine effort, from challenges met and overcome. His paws were slightly sore from climbing, his whiskers tired from their constant vigilant twitching. But these discomforts were badges of honor, physical reminders of what he had accomplished. The party sounds continued around him, but they seemed different now. For his journey, they had been foreign and overwhelming. Now they were simply the soundtrack to his realm, the ambient noise of the territory he surveyed from his fortress. He was part of this household, part of this celebration, in a way he had never quite understood before. As the evening deepened and the winter darkness pressed against the windows, Captain Ferdinand found his eyelids growing heavy. The excitement of his adventure, the satisfaction of his achievement, sweet taste of strawberry still lingering on his tongue, all combined to create a profound sense of contentment that pulled him gently toward sleep. But before he allowed himself to drift off, Ferdinand took one last look at his fortress, seeing it with new eyes. The platforms he climbed every day were not so different from the candy cane fence. The tunnels he navigated were cousins to the furniture forest. The wheel he ran on built the strength that had carried him across the carpet wilderness. His cage was not separate from the wider world. It was training ground. It was base camp. It was the place where an adventurer prepared for the next expedition. And Ferdinand understood now, in a way he never had before, that adventure was not about distance or danger. It was about curiosity. It was about courage. It was about being willing to step through an open door, even when you didn't know what waited beyond. The ordinary world, his familiar living room, had transformed into a landscape of wonder simply because he had chosen to see it that way. Every journey, no matter how small in physical distance, was epic if undertaken with an open heart and brave spirit. In the corner of his fortress, partially hidden by his bedding, but visible if one looked closely, lay the gumdrop. It was smaller now than when he had claimed it, reduced by his nibbling, but still substantial, still sweet, still a trophy worthy of his quest. Ferdinand curled into his sleeping position, his small body forming a perfect golden ball, his nose tucked beneath his tail. The sounds of the party grew quieter as guests began to leave, calling out their goodbyes and holiday wishes. He heard his caretaker's voice responding, warm and happy, and felt a surge of affection for these giants who provided for him, who had celebrated his adventure rather than scolding him for his escape. His whiskers twitched once, twice, then settled into stillness. His breathing deepened, becoming slow and measured. The events of the day replayed in his mind, but softly now, without the intensity of the actual experience. The fear had faded, leaving only the memory of courage. The uncertainty had transformed into the satisfaction of success. Captain Ferdinand, adventurer and explorer, conqueror of carpet, wilderness, and gingerbread mountains, drifted into sleep with a small smile on his hamster face, if such a thing could be said to exist. And in his dreams, he ran through endless fields of cinnamon and sugar, climbed towers of candy, and discovered new territories that smelled of ginger and possibility. The gingerbread house still sat on its table across the room, one gumdrop lighter than it had been that morning. The family would notice the missing candy eventually, would smile at the memory of their little explorer's ambition and determination. Perhaps they would take a photo of Ferdinand to commemorate the day. Perhaps the story would be told at future holiday gatherings, growing slightly more elaborate with each retelling. But for now, in this perfect, peaceful moment, there was only a small hamster sleeping deeply in his fortress, his belly satisfied, his heart full, his spirit enriched by the kind of adventure that proves the sweetest rewards are indeed found at the end of unexpected journeys. The party ended. The guests departed. The house grew quiet, except for the soft sounds of a family cleaning up, putting away leftovers, picking up those mountains of wrapping paper that had served as epic terrain for one small creature's odyssey. The Christmas tree lights twinkled in the darkness, casting gentle shadows across the living room. And in his cage, in his corner, curled in his bedding with his trophy nearby, Captain Ferdinand slept the deep, satisfied sleep of the truly adventurous, his tiny heart beating steadily, his whiskers occasionally twitching with pleasant dreams, his small form rising and falling with each peaceful breath. For he had learned something that day, something worth more than all the gumdrops in the world. That courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to venture forth despite it. That wonder was always available to those who looked at the ordinary with extraordinary eyes. That home was sweeter for having left it, even briefly, even just across a living room floor. And most importantly, that life's greatest adventures often began with a simple, open door and the bravery to step through it, to see where curiosity and courage might lead. The night deepened, the house fell silent, and Captain Ferdinand dreamed on, a small golden hero in a quiet fortress, resting after his epic day, ready for whatever adventures tomorrow might bring. But that would be a story for another time. If this story brought you a smile, if it carried you gently toward rest and peaceful sleep, if Captain Ferdinand's brave little journey resonated with your own sense of wonder, please consider showing your support with a like, and subscribe to Deep Sleep Stories Hub for more quiet nights and restful journeys, where even the smallest adventures can become the most memorable dreams. Sleep well, dear listener. May your own courage, no matter how small it seems, lead you to the sweetest rewards.